Cool. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Happy New Year, first of all. Welcome to 2023. It's supposed to be the best of the 2000 series. We'll see. But thanks for joining. My name is Sajin. Vince is also here with us. He'll jump in on the more technical pieces. I just want to get us kicked off here. Today, we're going to be talking about a specific trend that we're seeing, especially given the kind of events the last few, 2-3 years. But first, a quick introduction for anybody that doesn't know who we are. Vince and I are both from a company called IP ArchiTechs. If you don't know our group, we are a network design consulting firm. We work with clients all over the globe. Our team is all over the globe. We're very specialized in route switch network design. We work with some of the largest corporations in the world, some that you all know the name of, but then we also, on the other side, work with complete startups and everybody in between. So our clients include, we do a lot of work in the service provider space, data centers, enterprises, and then kind of all sorts of networks, right? So our clients come to us when you're looking for kind of technical guidance, and they have us do network audits. We give fresh eyes to kind of where they are, and then we kind of phase that into network design and architecture. And we don't just operate in a consultative role. We also kind of get in the driver's seat for our clients if they need us to, and help build configs, actually planning and executing migrations at any scale. We've done things for complete startups, like I said, in ISPs, but we've also done this for folks in the Fortune 100 space that are doing major forklifts into different platforms and different types of topologies and protocols. So we've got a unique mix of experiences and backgrounds on our team. Our goal usually for clients is to kind of tie the business needs, technical needs, and budget. And we're effective because we're not a VAR. Like traditional professional services groups, we sell nothing except for our time. So we don't really have any allegiance, any vendors. So when we kind of are approaching a problem, it's very much in the interest of, hey, we could stick with the vendors you have, or we could kind of go to one vendor. But typically we find that when you have a lot of different tools in your toolbox, we can take dollars further, effort further, and actually get a lot of better results when you're coming at it from a multi-vendor mindset. So that's what we do. We bring everything we know to the table, and that's kind of part of why today is important to us as well. A lot of folks, we'll talk about the MX204 specifically, and whether it's EOL and it's not EOL, and availability and things like that. But IP Infusion and white box networking are becoming a little bit more mainstream, and it's no longer the mainstream versus white box. I think that's kind of converging a little bit. So we wanted to really get this in front of people today. But on that disclaimer, IPI has been very supportive. IP Infusion has been very supportive in giving us the resources to evaluate their products and making sure customers are taken care of. But they've had no editorial oversight into what Vince and I are going to be talking about today. This is very much independent, and it's just one of a few different things that we're going to bring up in this series as people look for MX204 alternatives and like platforms and devices. Going back to one of our founders has a great way of putting this, and I'm sure many people in the chat here today have heard him say this. Kevin Myers, he says, "I don't care if you spend $1,000 on equipment or 10 million on equipment, as long as we agree on the right design and the right protocol stack and the use case. That's the right way to go for your business and your organization." So with that said, if your company, if your operation, your network is looking for an independent voice to kind of give you some insights and guidance, just some fresh thoughts, whether you're building, rebuilding, expanding, give us a call. Our contact information will be at the end, and this will be pretty much the only bit of salesmanship that we do. We're going to get right into nerding out today. So going into today's topic, when we put out this invite initially, I promise you, and maybe even to today, I don't know exactly, but I promise you the MX204 from Juniper is on the EOL list. There were rumors that maybe there was some supply chain alleviation and it was maybe not going to be EOL anymore. But when we started this process and kind of putting this together today, it was definitely EOL. I think today, officially, it's not EOL, even though maybe the website hasn't been updated, maybe it is today. But the reality still stands, right? When COVID kind of came, early, in 2020, something interesting happened. Two interesting things happened that we saw, at least from our position. Is one, everybody needed more internet, right? Absolutely overnight. It was crazy, especially in rural markets where traditionally you would get by with a very different use case. People working from home, you've got 4 kids doing Zoom school, files needing to be transferred that used to be on net in an office somewhere. Pretty much everybody just needed more internet overnight. And this has a cascading effect, right? Not only is it more bandwidth, you need bigger ports, you need bigger pipes, but in order to deal with some of that stuff, the equipment you need requires different levels of complexity, different protocols, just different knowledge. So all these things kind of happen, but at the same time, people were trying to upgrade, people were trying to rebuild their networks. The supply chain issues kind of came about, right? So the traditional graduation kind of path that we usually see for a lot of different networks, whether it's service provider or enterprise, that graduation path was very much interrupted, right? If you're a Cisco operation, you kind of know where to start, and then as you need to build things bigger and bigger, it's kind of set where you go. Same with Juniper, same with MikroTik, same with a lot of the other vendors out there. And when that supply chain disrupted what would be a normal no-brainer like next step for people, we started looking at different alternatives, right? So Nokia, Arista started becoming more and more in the conversation in sectors where they weren't. Nokia and Arista obviously have always been around, they've always had a place, but we started having the conversation of like, hey, is Nokia or Arista the right choice? Maybe where we wouldn't have had that conversation in the past, right? Because it came down to availability. But even that became a little bit difficult as time went on. And here we are in 2023, and this issue is still very much real for all of us. So white box is kind of a concept that I was introduced to a while ago. And it's one of the things that I know everyone's kind of heard the term white box networking, disaggregated networking, and it started becoming more and more a part of this conversation. It's funny because years ago, when I first heard the term white box, I didn't know anything. And my initial instinct was to, and this is years ago, I'll be very clear. My initial instinct was to Google who's the CEO of White Box Networking? Where are they located? What is this company, White Box? I kept hearing about this, right? But then you kind of realize that it's a little bit, it's more than that. So Vince, can we maybe start today? And by the way, there is a chat feature. I'll be monitoring the chat, but if you have specific questions that we will address at the end, or I'll monitor if we can address it on the spot. But there's a Q&A section with a separate in the Zoom feature. So use that for questions, because in chat it might get thrown away. But I think, Vince, as we start, I think the first thing we can talk about real quick is what is white box networking?
Yeah,
maybe you can help us kind of answer that.
Much like you coming out of the DoD, when somebody told me white box is a thing, I was like, wow, what's this? Why haven't we used it before? So I just go do my homework, and then I realized that it's not a company. It's, you take the software vendor, you put that on its own, you get your hardware vendors, and then you have choice of where you want to go. So I can go buy, a box from EdgeCore or Eufy Space or whoever, and it's got a Broadcom chip in it. I can put an OS on top of it, whether it's IP Infusion, Cumulus, insert other vendors,
Sonic,
XLR,
Dent.
Sonic.
There's a lot out there, yeah.
Various network operating systems on a variety of hardware. It's like, okay, there's something to go here, and then it kind of went to, what is this ecosystem? How do I navigate it? What do I need to do? Who are the key players? And does it work, right? So, that's where I had a lot to learn there coming out of the DoD.
And it's a different concept, right? Because usually when you think about a router, you are literally thinking about a box, and you put power into it and it routes packets, right? But now we're really separating the hardware from the software. So it's really about, there's two players every time you put something together. There's the hardware vendor, and then the software vendor that will enable whatever that hardware has, right? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, exactly. So if you kind of look at this ecosystem slide here, right, we have the ODMs. So Broadcom makes chips, Eufy Space, EdgeCore, they make switches. So, and IP Infusion is a network operating vendor, and you have to buy all those things kind of independently, or you can work through some key distributors that have figured out the how to deal with all these different vendors, and they'll sell it to you as a bundle or a package. So EPS Global, they're great about this. You can go to them, you can say, hey, I want this type of hardware, these port counts, these chipsets, and I need it for this type of deployment. And they can help, buy the actual support, the software, the switch, and deliver it to you so you can go and put it in. And then, you have people like us that we kind of know the entire ecosystem, so we can help you navigate, how do you talk to EPS Global, what switches are for the right place, which ODMs do you want, what's the right NOS.
And that's what disaggregate, that's where the term disaggregated comes from too, right? Because you've got Broadcom who's making the actual switch, like the chips that actually move packets. You've got EdgeCore that probably take those chips, put them in a box, and now you've got port counts and port density and different port speeds. And all of those have, I don't say they're not open, but all of those have anybody can program for them. But that's where IP Infusion basically comes on top of all of that and says, we're going to build an entire routing stack with these pieces, right? So that's how they're disaggregated compared to like a Juniper or Cisco, where they're basically making everything from the silicon to the chassis to the software.
Yeah, exactly. So, when you start to look at some of the higher end routers and platforms, everybody has their own custom silicon that's built and they manufacture it. And, Juniper Trio, Cisco has their own Nokia FP4. You start to get into those and they're building software specific for those. And those vendors, they use some merchant silicone as well, but they're still going to put their OS on top of it, right? It's still going to be Junos or EOS or iOS XR. Insert your flavor of vendor that makes their own closed system solution where, as long as you buy something on IP Infusion supported hardware list, you can load the OS on it. The same thing for all the other software vendors that play in this space. You go to them, they give you a supported hardware list, and you can buy any piece of hardware on that list and load your device on it or your OS on top of it.
Yeah, and from a supply chain standpoint, and I'm not a supply chain expert by any means, right? But I think it's becoming obvious on why this is a little bit more secure, right? Because you've got Broadcom making chips. They don't really care if EdgeCore or UFSpace are the ones buying them. They're just going to make this chip. Whoever buys them buys them. They have to license them, of course, but it's the same chip that's available for a bunch of different vendors. It's not like, well, Cisco has to make a specific chip for this only one product, right? So mass production of some of this stuff makes a lot more sense. And then same with the EdgeCore and UFSpace at that level, they're just building boxes, right? They don't really care what NOS or what network operating system you're actually going to put on there. So this is why I think this has become a little bit more attractive in supply chain crunch, because some of the stuff has just become more available just inherently because being commodity.
So we've noticed that, especially with a lot of our clients, right? We had one client, they were looking at a traditional solution and the lead times were over a year. So we went and, there was still EdgeCore boxes on the shelf that could get delivered. So they had business requirements. They had to do upgrades. They had to get 100 gig links in for capacity, and that couldn't slow down. They were out of capacity. So because there was something on the shelf that was sort of mass produced and wasn't just in time delivery, we were able to go and get that and put it in place.
Got it. So with all these different software vendors out there, right? We mentioned IP Infusion, which is going to be we're going to dive a little bit deeper into today, but they're not the only ones, right? I can take one of these blank switches or blank routers, so to speak, and we mentioned Sonic, we mentioned Dent, and there's a bunch of other ones out there. Even like you can Google and find those. But IP Infusion is something specifically that I think we wanted to focus on, because as our clients started realizing a need in different roles, all these other NOSes up until now have been very, very specific to what use cases they serve. And IP Infusion and Vince, I'll let you kind of speak more to this, but they have been a little bit more full featured in the routing stack and protocol support. And we've been working with them for gosh, 6, 7, 8 years maybe. Like we've done deployments with IP Infusion for a long time. Why would you say IP Infusion is maybe a good one to look at for most people in most networks out of the gate before
So
specializing?
they have broad feature support, right? So they've got support for all of your traditional things, MPLS, ISIS, segment routing, and they have a lot of different options on ports, speeds and feeds, right? So a lot of these other kind of white box solutions that I've come across, they've either been specific to they were trying to play to like the disaggregated chassis market, or something that's kind of niche versus, hey, here's kind of a drop-in replacement for a router. It looks and feels like a traditional router, and you can use it. It does all of your standard stack, does it well. They've been making routing software for years. OcNOS hasn't been around as long as IP Infusion ZebOS, so it's kind of got some track record behind it to go with it. So it's not a brand new startup. They've kind of proven that they've been able to perform in the service provider space. And
So
mostly
when we go ahead, Ben, sorry.
when up until recently with some of their newer support, we've kind of been limited to the aggregation layer or the tower network, or cell site routers, things out in kind of the access network. But as they've ported their code onto newer silicon, the Qumran 2C, it's enabled them to kind of play in the market space where you usually wouldn't see them. So border routing, full table routing, now there's an option for, I can use this as a peering and aggregate peering router on the edge router. I can take in more than one internet transit full table. I can take in transit and some IXs, a couple transits. I'm not at capacity of the box. So, there's some promising use cases there of where it can fit in that spot, that role.
So traditionally, what I'm hearing is, if we think about different use cases, just like the edge use case, for example, really the mainstream incumbent providers were the only ones with the full feature set to really make sense to use in those environments. But with kind of the recent developments, OcNOS has been around for a while. Of course, IP Infusion's been around for a long time. But with the recent developments and the recent kind of convergence, a lot of the stuff, it's becoming. Are you saying it's becoming much more real to use, OcNOS specifically and one of these switches in these different roles?
Yeah, exactly. So they're now you can get your basic feature sets that most people need, right? So you're not going to get the you're not going to get the newest feature out of the box. You're not going to be running MPLS over UDP or seamless BFD or some really advanced traffic engineering setups, or there's not a full-blown PCEP that you can go or PCE you can go and buy and have a SDN controller for your network, right? But if you're not a tier 1, you probably don't need a lot of that stuff, right? So, most regional mid-size ISPs, they don't always need all of those capabilities, right? They need stable deployments, they need layer 2 VPNs, they need to be able to route with BGP, they need to be able to do some fast reroute. Those are all capabilities that have been around in IP Infusion for a long time. And I see in the chat here, it does do MPLS or VXLAN for EVPN. So there's support on on both of those data planes, but
So when we, so if you're not a tier one, so there are some downsides to OcNOS, and not so much downsides, but some very specific, very niche features that maybe some of the mainstream providers have had for a while. But you're saying if you're not a tier one, you really should be just focusing on what you actually need in the face of not only availability but the cost savings that come with not being. I hate to say this. I mean, we love every vendor out there, but you know, the budget does make a difference whether you're going with a disaggregated provider or one of the incumbents out there.
yeah, so this comes down to, right, you don't need nerd points on a network design. Nerd points usually don't equal over to business use cases, right? So you want to meet your requirements and you want those requirements to be met well. So if your requirements don't have the need for, or I can't think of a good example at the moment. So like
The BFD stuff specifically, right?
yeah,
Like it's yeah.
like you might not need
You
it.
could
So
live without it and have a functional network compared to waiting, 2 years in the current supply chain, waiting for the specific box. And that goes back to kind of moving forward with like the MX204, kind of bringing it back full circle there. Up until supply chain disruption, it was very easy, right? It was very easy because of the price point that the MX204 was at, the feature set that it had, the configurations that it had. It was very easy to make that the kind of next step, the next graduation point for a lot of networks and a lot of different roles. So, but now given its kind of uncertainty, it's EOL, it's not EOL, but maybe it's still not available for some people. You still can't get your hands on units. This becomes a much more, as long as where I'm hearing from you is as long as you think about what you actually need versus just comparing the data sheets one-to-one on features, as long as like your needs are met, the disaggregated space, specifically OcNOS and some very specific hardware, becomes very, very viable.
yeah, exactly. So you don't try to shove everything into one router and make that a one router do everything box. You separate your functions out. You put key functions on separate routers. So you have border routers, you have core routers, you have aggregation routers, you have things that are in the access network, and you'll be running MPLS. You run some layer 2 VPNs back for aggregation. Maybe you're running a virtual BNG instead of hardware BNG, or appliance for CG NAT gateways. So you can start to separate all that out and get the same sort of functionality and needs out of that design. So you kind of have to relook your design to make sure you put the pieces in the right order so that you're successful, right? You can't treat a white box deployment like a traditional vendor deployment. And I think that's where a lot of people start to run into trouble of, hey, I just want to turn on every feature that there is on the box and make it do everything and it'll be great. And then I'll call tech and we'll be good to go, right?
So you've got a specific model here. Now, this isn't the only configuration. Like, to be clear, this is one particular piece of hardware that OcNOS supports that you're kind of putting up against the MX204. It doesn't have to specifically be this model of UFI space or even UFI space. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
And then let's
right.
walk through this a little bit.
We put up this one because it has a higher route count. It's got, port density. It's something that's can be used in the peering edge role. It can take in more than one full table, so you're not out of capacity. So there's a few other options that are one RU that will get you to one full table, but then you're kind of out when you get there. So then you're looking at buying another box as you sort of scale up per your transit providers, right? So your design changes a little bit there, where this might get you closer to MX204 on the route count portion, and it kind of a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is the port configuration on the MX204. So you have to do pretty careful port planning to get all of your port usage, or you have to put a port extender out, and that will allow you to get some good port density with this version. The 9600 you see here on the left, you don't have to do any of that. You have the ports that are there. You can use them. You can use them at line rate. It's nice. It's a non-issue, right? I've definitely run into the surprise of, oh, I use 300 gig ports and now I need a 10 gig port, so I can't use the last 100 gig port on the MX204, or I have to down speed it to a 40 gig port, and then you're stuck there trying to figure out how to get more ports out of this, or what switch do I have in the closet that I can put in to bring this up, right?
Let's circle back a little bit because I want to get your thoughts just personally when you first, because you have a DoD background, right? So all jokes aside, I mean, you were really only using top dollar equipment, right? For the most part. So when you were first introduced to Whitebox, what were your thoughts? Did you have any concerns? Because a lot of our customers, when we kind of put this on the table or they're asking us about it, it's usually with a lot of trepidation, right? It's usually, well, what's support like, or is it real, or how can it be so inexpensive, or how can they actually have all this? What were your kind of questions and thoughts? Did you have any skepticism
Yeah,
in the Whitebox
so
space?
my initial response, right, I shared a little earlier was, is this like, what's Whitebox? Who's the company? It's sort of like yours. And then I was like, okay, well, none of these are on the approved product list. So if they didn't put in the time to be on the approved product list, like, they're not a real solution. And then I finally got my hands on some, and it looks and feels and acts like any other router, right? At the end of the day, it's protocols and its features, and as a very Cisco-like CLI, it's got commit confirm or commit check functionality, kind of like Juniper. It doesn't compare to Juniper's all the way, but it does protect you from the accidental, I pasted in 100 lines of config on a Cisco box, and oops, I just rewrote my entire router with my production router with the lab router, right? So you can protect yourself a little like that, and all of your standard protocols, your normal features that you would need, MPLS, label switching, OSPF, OSPF v3, ISIS, BGP, and they work the same way that you would expect it to work on any other router.
Was it difficult, or was it pretty simple? Like what would you recommend is the easiest like place to be and find IP Infusion OcNOS easy to pick up, I guess, from I'm a software guy, right? So for me, it's like, hey, what language should I know before to make this easier for me? Is it more Cisco-like, Juniper-like? Like what, and how difficult was it for you to kind of pick up the syntax and managing this type of box?
It's very Cisco-like CLI. So, it looks and feels like driving a Cisco iOS router, with the exception of EVPN configuration. How you configure that is significantly different. So, it functions the same EVPN address families, but it's actually attaching the services looks a lot different. So that's something that took a little bit of time to learn and get used to. You had to make sure you knew what you were doing and how it worked together, so you could get the services in place.
Got it. Now you've done several deployments of this using all kinds of different excuse me, protocols. Did you guys find any like challenges or any roadblocks? Are they worth talking about? TAC experience, I know, is the big question that comes up. I know I know people have certain experiences with like traditional TAC with Cisco, Juniper, things of that nature, and they've been around for so long. They have internal knowledge bases. They're deployed so widely in so many different configurations that you can almost call them with any issue, and it's likely that they have some notes on it. What was your experience with IPI in that? If you had any issues?
So it's definitely a different experience, right? So it's all online ticket based. So you put in a ticket, they respond to it, based off priority. If it's a critical, they're really quick to respond, and uh, my general experience is they've been more willing to help holistically identify the problems and help determine, whether it's a problem on their gear or another party's gear, where sometimes if you go with a traditional vendor's tack, they'll get you started, they'll go to a point, and then they'll say like, oh, it looks like it's somebody else's problem. Where I've always got um the feeling that they're really trying to help regardless of the problem, and if there is a bug identified, the bug fixes have come within, anything from a couple days to a couple weeks, where if it's on traditional vendor, you're just waiting for the next maintenance release, right? Unless you're somebody that's spending a big time amount of money with them, right? So seems like there's a lot more involvement.
Yeah. So we've done some deployments in different roles. I think maybe we have a slide. Can we maybe talk about like a real network and where would IPI be a good fit for today?
So before, we used to put it really in the access aggregation and the access network, metro network. So out on a tower, a cabinet by the side of the road somewhere, aggregate back at your data center with layer 2 VPNs. But with some of those newer boxes that we've talked about, then we've now started to see them be able to be used as core and peering routers. So they have some 32 by 100 routers now, and some 1RU and 2RU routers that can take in the full table with 100 gig and 1025. So, I know we picked a specific box to look at, but there's other ones that can get you in these different roles. It doesn't necessarily have to be that one.
Now you said the way you phrased it was like, hey, before we used to do it this way, and now we can kind of do these other roles. Is that because of like recent developments, recent support, recent hardware? Is there maybe some maturing that needs to happen? Like, what are some of the caveats that maybe is it completely stable? Like, if I just go drop this in right now, do you feel pretty confident for most networks, or are there some edge cases?
For most things, it's for most simple deployments or things that don't have networks that don't have a lot of technical debt. I mean, every service provider network has a lot of technical debt, so being able to handle that in a reasonable way, that's where it comes into the design and how do we handle that? Where do we put the pieces together to help remove the technical debt and get to a sort of standard solution, right? So that that's where the access aggregation is where we really spent a lot of time up until those newer chipsets were supported. I think it's been about a year, maybe, or 6 months that they've been supported now. So 6 has seen a couple of maintenance releases as already, and I know they've been putting a lot of focus on stability as versus new feature support to make sure that some of those horror stories you heard from the early days of white box where everybody was upset kind of fade out, and now we're in more mature versions with 5 and 6.
Yeah, and that just goes to like we did some of our first as a company, IP Architects, we did some of our first deployments for clients using Lightbox, like I said, 6, 7 years ago. And yeah, there definitely were some valid reasons to maybe, hey, this is only reserved for people willing to work at it or redesign or kind of play a little bit of whack-a-mole when it comes to it. But now you're thinking that, hey, we can just go and deploy this, and for most networks, unless there's something specific, it's okay.
Yeah, for most use cases, that's I would say that that's accurate.
Yeah.
Unless there's some real big edge cases. Whenever you do any new deployment or migration, issues come along with it. It doesn't matter what vendor you're putting in. When you start doing migrations, you can't see everything that's going to happen. I wish we could. You can't tell if, hey, I got a bad port on one router or another. So, the bumps in the road are gonna come along as you tune your network, right? There's as much as I would love for there to be a golden config, you could just snap your fingers, put it in place, and it's 100% rock solid day one, first set. That just doesn't exist.
So going, I know you touched on it a little bit earlier as we were talking, but let's just like protocol support. Are we pretty comfortable saying that this is pretty full featured, or are there still any glaring missing pieces in the routing stack that you can think of that maybe people should be aware of? And I'm sure some could be worked around, but
Yeah, I think most of those come around like layer 3 VPNs with EVPN, or maybe that's one that came to mind. I think they resolved that in the latest 6 maintenance release, where you can do that's with a MPLS data plane, VXLAN data plane. You've always been able to do layer 3 with EVPN, but there's some weird like edge cases that you have to know about. So if you want to run like LDP signaled VPLS on segment routing, you have to have an interface that is in LDP regardless of if you're doing any LDP or not. So there's some weird, like, you have to really read the release notes to make sure you know that, so you're not sitting there kind of banging your head against the wall going, why isn't this coming up? Oh, it's because I didn't have LDP on an interface, right?
got it. But some of those, if it's quirk, if we're only worried about quirks like that, and again, I mean, I don't know the exact pricing about this because it's going to depend on what piece of hardware you get and what kind of licensing you get, just like anything else. But it is significantly more economic than a lot of traditional vendors out there. So at scale, there's a certain point at which spending, whatever the cost is dealing with those quirks becomes worth it. Just like any vendor, right? There's going to be some quirks, but dealing with OcNOS's quirks have a higher rate of return on investment. It sounds like, at least right now, given the maturity over the past couple of years.
Yeah, and when you start to look at putting projects on hold due to lead time, right? So there's lost business if I can't add new subscribers because I'm at capacity, right? If I need to go from 10 gig to 100 gig and I have to wait a year and I'm already at 10 gig, right? I only have so many options before I'm just losing money on, I'm not building that new business. So, time to get things in place, from order, initial phone call, it's drastically, it's extremely quick in comparison, even in the sales cycle, right? haven't got that same VAR-like experience of where you have to go back and forth 5 or 6 times to get the biggest discount that you can, to you go buy the box that has a year lead time, right? It's, hey, this is what we have, here's the price, it can be delivered in 3 weeks. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, folks, if there's any specific questions, put them in the Q&A or in the chat. I know we've got some IPI people actually in the chat who are answering things, but this has been our overview. We're probably going to do another one of these where we talk about a different, as the MX204. Truthfully, I don't think anybody really knows whether the EOL moniker or not is going to make a difference on its availability, right? So we're going to continue doing this series and kind of exploring different options as people need something, and where the default used to be like, hey, the MX204 is a great platform at the price that it's at for a lot of different people. We're going to explore some other things as well. But this has been OcNOS and IP Infusion. We're going to stick around. If anybody else has any general questions, we're here as well. The IPI guys are in chat. But feel free to toss them our way about anything. I know one thing that has come up a couple of times in the Q&A, Vince, is questions about using this as a BNG.
Yeah, so there's no BNG support at the moment, but normally we pair that up with a different virtual BNG. A lot of times we go with NetElastic for those deployments. So we'll pass layer 2 into NetElastic to do our subscriber management there, and we'll run a vBNG paired up. So kind of going back to our picture, this would be the one place where we wouldn't be recommending OcNOS products or have availability on this picture, right? So,
and does that go back to kind of the concept of like, hey, you're used to buying this Juniper box or Cisco box or whatever, and you can use it for VXLAN, EVPN, MPLS, like you use it for whatever you need, and then hey, if I needed to access my BNG, I could just throw a license and a card in there, and now it's my BNG. But that's not how to think about it when you're in this white box disaggregated space.
Yeah, and even if you go with the BNG solution on an MX204, right? I'm not sure you can get as many subscribers as if you went with virtual BNG on an x86, where you can still do the same license upgrades, because you're going to be limited by what that hardware platform can support. So that's still why a lot of I tend to push people towards the virtual BNG solutions for newer deployments.
And that's also where, and this is something, we did a whole other webinar on this a few months ago, just on separation of network functions, right? Kevin Myers from our team did that. And that's a really important concept because of what you just said, right? So, hey, if my mindset is I need to buy this box and it's going to do everything I need at this location or at this, in this role, and that may include, all the layer 3 protocols I need and BNG, for an example. But if my needs on the BNG side increase, or my needs on the throughput side increase, with that mentality, you're kind of stuck with having to upgrade the entire box and all of the licensing for all the box's capabilities. Whereas if you start separating these things out, you can kind of strategically license different units with different features as you need them, and let them grow independently.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that point up, Sajjan, because one of the kind of easiest parts of at least IP Infusion is their licensing model. You get what's on the sheet for, they have an IP SKU, which is just IP. They have an MPLS SKU, which gives you the MPLS features, and then they have a timing SKU. So you're only dealing with 3 separate options, and that's what you get. There's none of this guessing. Did I get enough? Do I get 8 VRFs or 9 VRFs? And did I get my 100 gig ports licensed or not? You get the full feature of the box based off which SKU you bought.
Yeah. All right. So everybody, thanks for joining. I know we kind of went a little bit over on today's schedule here, but feel free to keep the questions pouring in. We're going to stick around. Like I said, it looks like there's more than one IPI person from IPI actually in the chat. Shout out to Rishi and Kelly. We know them pretty well. But as we wind down, I mean, Vince, I'll ask you a quick question. IPv6, that's kind of a big thing, very big thing that's trending upward in the last year and moving forward. Do you have much experience IPv6 on OcNOS and how it performs in different ways?
So
And
I've done a
not so much
couple.
performance, but support for IPv6. Yeah.
I've done a couple basic deployments, but we have some new OcNOS gear in our lab in Jackson that we're gonna be doing a lot of IPv6 testing on. So, most of our field deployments have been simple ISIS with V6 AFI and BGP V6, and that works as it's supposed to, but we haven't done any real advanced use cases. So look for us to be kind of doing some things in our lab environment and be able to provide some better answers in the future.
Yeah. Cool. So again, as and I see, people are dropping off here. We've gone a little bit over. Just to recap, we're from IP Architects. We're a network design company. We are multi-vendor. We work with really anything out there. If you've got a network and your organization needs some help, feel free to give us a call. Our number and email is on the screen right now. But what are you most excited about, Vince? Kind of, is there anything? I know there might be some stuff under NDA, but is there anything in the white box space that kind of excites you? I know Sonic has some very specific use cases. What other vendors are there that you would probably recommend?
Well, I know Sonic is kind of the buzzword at the moment, but support is a nightmare to say the least. So Sonic doesn't get that it's hard to go and say put that out because just supportability of it. So it doesn't really get me that excited. Something that did excite me was the partnership announcement a couple months ago between IP Infusion and Marvell. So that'll open up a whole new ecosystem of chips that are supported and switches and gear. So I'm excited to see what ends up being supported in the Marvell set and what that partnership leads to, and see if that see what that brings to the table.
Interesting point that you made earlier, right? So with the Sonic support, I feel like there's a lot of folks that like Whitebox, because it was a new concept, everything kind of gets lumped into behind that one word, right? Behind that one buzzword, Whitebox, disaggregated networking, et cetera. But it is important to kind of identify and realize that there are a lot of different players in that game, and they are at various different maturity levels, and they service a lot of different audiences. So yes, we may have something like Sonic where our experience is like, hey, support maturity, really getting it up and going is not a cakewalk, but that doesn't really take away from other vendors that are out there that really that have matured toward a different audience. Maybe it's a bit more your audience. So I almost, do you see in the conversations that you've been having, and I've been having some of these as well with on the sales side, do you see the term white box and disaggregated networking almost starting to maybe it should go away, or maybe it is going away, and we kind of just talk about, hey, IP Infusion's IP Infusion, Sonic is Sonic, Dent is Dent, like, all these other things. How do you feel about the kind of way this has been framed over the last few years and now?
You are starting to see kind of those ecosystems, but it's more about the support ecosystem, right? So when I think about the vendors, I think about the support that comes along with it, and do they have a solid, I don't think the term white box or disaggregation is dead, because that's what you're doing, but the people that are kind of coming to the forefront are the people that have supportable products, right? And they're starting to see, because of the supportable products, they're getting put in place, they're being used, they're being deployed, where some of these other things we've heard about them, and I'm sure there's public success stories of distributed disaggregated chassis and Sonic deployments, right? Microsoft, but not everybody's Microsoft. Not everybody has the internal support resources that Microsoft has to be able to go and run an open source software stack from start to finish without some sort of third-party support system or integration done for them, right? So,
and what's we didn't really cover this too much, but unless you're a complete greenfield and you can somehow convince yourself that I'm going to go completely IP Infusion with every single element, most people that are going to be looking at this are going to be people running existing networks, and they're going to try to expand or rebuild in certain roles with other vendors at play in the protocol stack. What would you comment on IP Infusion and OcNOS specifically, and it's like interop with different vendors on different scale at different levels?
So most of the things just work, but the things that haven't worked, they've been very quick to go and work with their customers to figure out why it doesn't work and implement a bug fix, or in the case of the issue earlier, it was another vendor's bug, and we were able to pinpoint, we need to upgrade these other boxes to be able to have this work and work effectively, right? So it's really encouraging to see that level of, we're willing to kind of help you through these challenges and make sure that everything works as expected.
Got it. And that's true of all vendors, though, right? This is not a maturity thing. I mean, we've had situations where, like, even Juniper doesn't work with other mainstream vendors, like Dell, for example, right?
Yeah,
so
and I've had a Cisco ASR and Cisco Nexus that wouldn't speak BFD to each other, right? So even platforms within the same vendor but different product families that have issues, right? So it's not, whenever you start mixing different platforms, there's variables that, as much as we would love to see all of them, we just can't, and we're gonna have to deal with those as they come up and make sure that we put in the right design to kind of minimize those chances of hitting bugs or shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak.
Cool. So I think activity's kind of dying down a little bit. We'll let everybody go, have the rest of their day. If anybody wants a deeper conversation, a one-on-one conversation about their needs, their networks, please reach out to us, consulting@iparchitects.com. Again, we're a network design firm, we're a consulting firm. We have no skin in the game other than making sure we've got the right design in front of you and in your business. So IPI is just one tool in our toolbox. But if you've got anything else going on, give us a call and we'll see what we can do to help you out. But thanks everybody for joining. It's always good to have this live. We obviously could just record this and throw it out there, but it's great watching the chat and kind of evolving what we talk about as we go. Vince, anything else you want to add?
No, thanks for joining, everybody.
All right, folks. Have an awesome day.